first of all, I would like to apologize. I'm right now in isolation, in quarantine, so I'm not with my library. But anyway, I'm able to present as much as I can. And I would like to use my time to somehow introduce you what you can do with North Korea, or like a more specifically, or historical studies or Confucianism and so on. And I would like to, above all, try to dispel some popular images of how it looks like when you are working on North Korean stuff and so on. And this is, so to say, to motivate you to do it as well. Yeah, because I think North Korean studies need desperately more sane people, because as you notice, like Korean studies are attracting quite a lot of people who are somehow I would say not familiar with the own, in good terms, with the own culture. So they are trying to change the personality via Korean studies. And it's like a twice more intensive in case of North Korean studies. Yeah. And what is really said that North Korean studies are basically in the popular imagination reduced to question when there will be reunification, or whether there will be the war next week or something like that. And we are somehow like missing a lot of interesting stuff, like studies of religion, history. Literature is done pretty well, I have to say. But nevertheless, in many topics, historical topics, there are some blank spaces. Okay, so first of all, I would like to say right at the beginning that visiting of North Korea is not at all a precondition for good studies on North Korea. Because visiting of North Korea could have very various shapes and conditions. And it could happen that you are simply sitting in North Korea without any access to anything. And you can, after all, claim that you were in you were in North Korea, but it brings you nothing. Yeah, it can happen. There are some. It can happen that you are allowed to travel to visit something, but it's almost never free. And I will give you one example. Yeah, since 1960s, never ever has been allowed to Kim Il-sung's University Library. Yeah. You can even study at the Kim Il-sung University, but you will never be allowed to directly go to see the funds. You will be maybe allowed to borrow some books and so on, but that's all. Yeah, or they will bring you the books. Yeah, the same you can say about National Archive in Minseoptang. If you are really able to get political connections and get access to materials, like they will show you something or they will give you something, but it doesn't mean that you will be allowed to work like in normal archives, that you will be able to see all catalogs, etc. So there are quite a lot of restrictions which are really limiting what you can do or see directly and so on. So I would like to say that you can do most of the research on a lot of North Korean topics outside of North Korea, just based on materials and so on. You know, like this classical paradigm that you are reading the sources and then you will talk with professor and colleagues and people, and they will tell you how it works and how it developed, is not much functioning in North Korea. It doesn't mean that they will not tell you many interesting things, but you know, there are official lines. So I would like to say that ask some professor from history department why their colleagues in 1955 were executed and so on is kind of academic suicide or practical suicide in North Korea. So my sources are coming from North Korea. I bought a lot of them. I've got a lot of knowledge from discussions with my North Korean colleagues and contacts and so on. But nevertheless, the bulk of my materials is basically from Europe, from the European libraries, especially countries which had a good contacts with North Korea. So I would like to say that if you want really to see the North Korean production, the Russia is St. Petersburg is perfect. Moscow State Library, which has very good catalog, is perfect. Something is in Berlin, something in Prague, and I had big luck for my old professors who studied and worked in North Korea. So let's say for early decades of the regime, I'm quite well supplied. But I would like to stress, if you are looking for North Korean materials, it's difficult, but you will always find them. Yeah, many of them are even in London, in States. Many of them you can buy in China or in Japan. There are online bookshops for North Korean literature. It's somehow complicated because it's North Korea is under sanctions and so on. But you can always get enough materials. And I would say like then that you are actually visiting like in North Korea and you are able to see the stuff on your own eyes. It's, I would like to say, cherry on the top. Honestly, in many cases, I would be able to come to same conclusions without visits of North Korea. But of course, it sounds perfect for the audience, yeah, because like if and it's also like a kind of psychological hindrance for people to deal with North Korea, because you suppose that when you have never been in North Korea, you are somehow not entitled to speak about that, and it's always the first question you got. But this is just popular imagination. Okay, title of my presentation is Confucian Relics in North Korea. And I would like to start that once we are talking about Confucianism or Confucian relics in North Korea, we've got several problems. First is the common attitude that North Korea or the northern Korean provinces, means Pyongan, Hamgyong, and Hwanghae, were somehow less Confucian and civilized and developed than the capital and southern provinces. Yeah, and it's like this is what we have learned in the textbooks when we studied, that there was the regional discrimination against northern regions, that people from the northern regions were not allowed to participate in state examinations, etc., etc., etc. I can say that this is, of course, to a certain extent true, but it doesn't mean that there hasn't been like a thriving Confucian culture, shrines, schools, academies, etc. in North Korea. Now, small footnote. What do I mean by Confucian culture and relics? We can discuss about the definitions, what are like a state institution, what are Confucian institution, etc. But during my lecture, you will see what is designed or labeled as Confucian relics by North Koreans themselves. Yeah, so this is what you will see, what is basically labeled as the Confucian in North Korea during my. North Korean provinces were not as much thriving Confucian communities. There were not such strong communities like in southern provinces, but nevertheless there were significant numbers. Yeah, I can give you examples like when we are talking about Confucian academies and we are talking about Gyeongsang, we are talking about 300, something like that. When we are talking about Pyongan, we are talking about 40, yeah, which is much less, but nevertheless 40 Confucian academies are pretty big number. We are also talking about Pyongyang, which was basically the second biggest city and which was really culture center. And right now I'm reading, it's quite good when you are bored. Sogyong Shihwa, yeah, the like literary talks from the Western capital, from Pyongyang, and you will see that Pyongyang literati felt by no means inferior to Seoul or etc. Another aspect is that there was also Kaesong, yeah, and all in all, northern provinces were dotted by many relics, both tangible and intangible. Now, when we are like really trying to say what were Confucian relics located in northern provinces, we got like a big problem because we have, first of all, data which are from the Joseon times, and then we have got modernization, colonial period, liberation, and Korean War. Yeah. And during all these things, a lot of those institutions disappeared, were transformed, etc. Yeah. So when you look for UPCHI or local gazetteers and so on, you've got a lot of interesting data, but these are valid from the 18th, 19th century. Yeah. There is quite difficult to look in detail what really happened in colonial times. Now I have to stress that especially concerning Confucianism, colonial period was really interesting because it was time when a lot of things were published. There was state support for Confucian organization. And we see both collaboration and resistance and so on. Yeah, like our general image is that like in 1910, all threw away Confucian classics and started to study Western science and Christianity and everything. But on the normal level, many things just continued as they were before. Yeah. If you look, for example, for edition of Confucian classics, like you've got enormous number of editions from 1920s, 30s, which are basically reprints of the originals from the 16th, 17th century. Yeah, there was no development. If you would judge it only by this bibliographical data, you would see no like a discontinuation or modernization or anything like that. Yeah. The colonial period was for Confucian institutions like schools and local societies and publication of various works, like a quite interesting period. And now we are going to the most problematic part, and it's liberation and period between liberation and Korean War. Because what happened during these years was is not much well described, and it was really rather chaotic. In the moment of the liberation and establishing like the foundations of North Korean regime, the Confucianism was, or Confucian organization and relics were placed in rather problematic position, because on one hand, Confucian people who were active in Confucian communities were usually members of the ruling class, though they either quickly escaped or were really quickly liquidated. Yeah. But on the other hand, their property was either nationalized or destroyed or in somehow limbo. Yeah. We can see strategies ranging from direct liquidation of feudal past of the Korean nation to protecting the cultural heritage of the Korean nation. And the question, what was from those Confucian relics declared as a national heritage and what was declared as a feudal relics, which is disturbing to building of the new society, was, I would say, made on some precedents, but also in many cases really ad hoc. Yeah. Concerning North Korea, I would like to stress that North Korea was since the very beginning actively encouraging also culture protection and culture monuments, etc. Yeah, I've got like this is current poster, but already in Munhwa Yusan you can see the posters which were like exhorting the population to take care of heritage. There were there are still a lot of journals and topics at etc. And there was pretty strict legislation since the very beginning. Yeah, in the Chungyo Yujok Myeongsung Chunen Kinyom Del Ilam, there's appendix where are like all decrets related to culture protection and cultural heritage, like in North Korea, most of them signed by Kim Il-sung, and it's since the very early that it's forbidden to destroy cultural relics, etc. The only problem was what were those culture relics. I can say that much like in South Korea, what was from the very beginning designed as cultural heritage were things which had been already protected by Japanese government. Yeah, Japanese government developed Kodrutsa Sintian make studies about that, but Japanese government established quite solid foundation of cultural heritage protection. And these, I would say, laws and a special list of relics were taken over by both Korean states. Yeah. So when the North Koreans were like building or taking over the stuff from Japanese, and there were quite a lot of collections. There was Kaesong Museum. There are studies about Kaesong Museum. There be in Pyongyang, etc. They basically had already at disposal some framework what is supposed to be cultural heritage. And here is the first point interesting for our discussion, and this is the status of Confucian relics. Yeah, because as far as I can tell, the Korea the colonial times culture collection was slightly or heavily biased in direction of Buddhism. Yeah, this is for Japanese was Buddhism, like many of them were like themselves active Buddhists, was pretty interesting. And second, it was based on idea that older the better. Yeah, so the most protected were like the oldest things. For Confucianism, for Confucian relics like shrines, schools, and as well as publications and so on, it was rather unfortunate because they were not much old, and the protection focused on choreo staff and so on. What was 18th century or 19th century? Those were relatively new and not much interesting buildings, yeah, or like relics. And though Joseon period Confucian relics from all areas were seen not as much valuable as choreo stuff or like Shila stuff and so on. And the second problem was that they were really closely associated with the feudal structure, and Confucianism or Nalgan Sasang, as it was frequently said, was officially declared as the enemy of the new regime. And here starts basically the most interesting question: what survived this period? I will connect this question with the question of Korean War, because if you are trying to ask in North Korea about shrines, schools, or books, or libraries, or many things, it's always said that these things were destroyed in Korean War. Yeah. Fortunately, we can document that many of them actually survived Korean War, and they were either abandoned or destroyed later by the regime. Yeah. Because if you are familiar with the development of the North Korean regime, I would say that the first decade was really quite chaotic, and the North Korean state had really other problems than to take care of Confucian relics and other stuff. But this changed like after 1960 and so on. And the North Korean regime literally cleaned the whole country. Yeah, I will tell you, I frequently tell the best example: in North Korea, you do not have graves as in South Korea in the nature, traditional old graves. Yeah, these were all removed. Yeah, and now are like in designed areas in the cities. But really, you cannot see this typical Korean thing that you see the hill and there are small mounds. Yeah, it disappeared. It was unpractical. Yeah, it was occupying too much arable land or unarable land. So this is just one example, and North Korean regime was really able. We were also taught that cult of ancestors is the basic glue of the Korean society, and the most important even than Chuseok, etc. Yeah. In North Korea, they are celebrating Chuseok. They are going to the parties in the nature, but they are not going to the graves because graves were removed. Yeah. And of course, like in many cases, like when you ask where are the graves, they tell you that those were destroyed by American imperialists, but at the end they admit that these were like removed. So the North Korean regime was removing even graves, yeah, though even more some schools or academies or shrines to so on. So this typical imagination of the Korean landscape, which is littered by many Confucian relics, like gates for chaste women and a lot of stelas and inscriptions. Those were gone. Yeah, I can tell you. I can show you picture. A picture from Chongjin in 1955, when local authorities assembled all grave figures or like statues and so on, and used them as a material for building of the new road. Yeah. So there was, I would say, wave of destruction, which was, I would say, gradual. Yeah. And where we can find data are North Korean publications documenting culture relics. And of course, we've got like a documents like what was destroyed during the Korean War. Yeah, but those are just the main relics. But this book, and especially this book, Yongsun Kojok Chonrang Kinyomu Pyolam, were rather detailed and described county by county, where were like shrines, inscriptions, stupas, Confucian schools, Yangyo, Confucian Academy, so on, etc. Yeah. And if we compare those data with the more later, we see that still in 1960 there were still some things extant, and they were destroyed only later. Yeah, this is case, for example, in Heju, Suyang Mountains. There was the shrine for Poi and Shuchi, the Chinese sages, which was slightly damaged during the war, but it was still building in 1957. Yes, these are the oldest record, and then it completely disappeared. Yeah, Heju is restricted military area, so it's not possible to go there directly, or it's very difficult. But we may suppose that like it disappeared sometime in 1960, something like that. But on the other hand, we've got quite a lot of relics, like local school in Hamhung, which survived and were really designed as a protected culture heritage. Yeah. And this was the case, for example, of Ryongok Sawon next to Pyongyang, which is still extant. And here you can see the current state. And it was, for example, the case of Sohyeon Sawon, which is near Heju, and it's important because it was the place where Yulgok lived and lectures and so on. And it was designed as a culture protected area as well. On the other hand, we have quite a lot of relics which were destroyed. Yeah, this is most famously Kija grave in Pyongyang, or Kija's altar and shrine, Kija Chegung and Kujudang. Yeah, this was the altar for Kija, which was also in Pyongyang. And a lot of, I would say, other buildings, etc. What is even more interesting than buildings and so on are books, materials. Yeah. Because theoretically, those were all nationalized. Yeah. When the Confucian schools and academies became the state property in the early 50s, also theoretically, it was supposed that all valuable historical stuff should be given to the state, and to some degree it really happened. But I can tell you that the results of this process were somehow problematic, and I spent really a long time trying to figure out what really happened with old books, for example, from Sohyeon Sawon. Yeah, because like we know that it was Yulgok synagogue school, even though it was burned during the Japanese invasions. There were archives, chronicles, everything. Like, were those things like taken to the south? No, though they remained in the north or were they destroyed during the war or before or later and so on. The first, interestingly, this is the good example that you really do not need North Korea to study the stuff. The interesting clues are found in Russia. This is the catalog of Kim Il-sung University from 1958, and the catalog of old books. Yeah. And thanks to Lena Kondratyev from Moscow, I was able to get the copies. And you see that you've got like quite a lot of interesting stuff. And you've got even some books, yeah. And this is the Indiana Jones story of the North Korean stuff. Everybody in every other major or historical major dreams that there are things in North Korea which we do not have in South, or there are some clues to the history problems and documents which are there hidden in archives or kept by people from generations and in underground and so on. I have to say that this imagination is rather too optimistic. Yeah, if you look at the catalog of the Kim Il-sung's library, also one of the leading institutions, one of the 2 or 3, like the main institution in North Korea concerning like research is, of course, Kim Il-sung's University, Academy of Sciences, Kwahagwon, and then you have a National Archive, and the people are like quite closely cooperating. And if you look at this catalog, you will see that we are speaking about roughly 3,000–4,000 books in the archive of the rare books of Kim Il-sung's University. That's not much. Yeah, this is what used to be the library of one Confucian academy. Yeah. If you compare it, for example, with Kyuchangak, the hundreds of thousands, and so on. So this is really, at the first sight, it was really disappointing. And when I was able to see some of the books directly, and those were mostly already collected by Japanese collectors. Yeah, there were stamps. They tried to remove the stamps, but you can see that basically they nationalized some Japanese collections and took them to the university. It took really years until we discovered that slightly better situation is in National Archive in Minsetang, where they have obviously parts of the Sohyeon Sowon archives. They've got chronicles of Sohyeon Sowon, which are completely unknown. We believe that they disappeared sometimes. There are chronicles of Gyeonghyun Sowon. There are some stuff which we know better. For example, Tumundong Sowon next to Kaesong published its chronicles in Japanese time, but there are some older versions and so on. So it really worked like that the regime nationalized intellectual property of libraries of Confucian institutions, but obviously only from those most famous Lo, Gyeonghyun Sowon and Sohyeon Sowon, and other smaller academies or local Confucian schools in Hamgyongdo, etc., were basically just clean and they threw the books away. Yeah. The same thing we can see in Kaesong Songyungwon. Yeah, Kaesong Songyungwon was basically clean in the main hall. There was exhibition since 1950s exhibition about peasants' uprisings in North Korea, and all like relics, like archives, tablets of the scholars and so on. Those disappeared. Yeah, some of them are probably in Kaesong Museum, but as I mentioned, those were not things which were considered to be valuable. Yeah, preserving Confucian writings in the times like when there was officially declared the fight against old superstition and so on, or presenting the tablets of scholars from the altars was certainly not the priority of the regime. Though we have rather, I would say, mixed set of examples of institutions which were destroyed, which were abandoned, which were protected, and some of them which were really somehow prominent. Yeah, this is, for example, Sohyeon Salon, which was designed as one of the primary national holiday spot for workers and peasants. And if you look, this sounds a little bit bizarre, but if you look on 3 extant Confucian academies in the North Korea, yeah, so Hyonsewon in near Haeju, Sungyangsewon in Kaesong, and Yonggukseowon next to Pyongyang. You see that they are preserved because they were part of like a, I would say, broader context. Yeah, Sungyangsewon was in Kaesong, which was since the very beginning protected. Yeah, Kaesong was immediately protected by the like a cultural heritage by the regime. Ryongok-sewon was protected as a part of also Ryongaksan mountain, I would say, culture area, where there are some also Buddhist monasteries, and so on. And Sohyeon-sewon is interestingly quite frequently mentioned as a part of Soktam Kugok. Yeah, so the place is not like a Sohyeon-sewon, but the whole area and sceneries and so on. And what is really important, all those 3 places were legitimized by visits of Kim Il-sung. Yeah, Kim Il-sung personally designed those are things to be protected. Yeah. Sometimes it's post-rationalization, but really, like we have documented, we know that Kim Il-sung decided that those things should be protected, and on the other hand, the other things were just discarded. Yeah, if you are interested about Kim Il-sung and this and Kim Jong-il and the cultural protection, there are quite a lot of books, yeah, where are describes of visits and comments on famous relics, and of course these things were like fabricated, but nevertheless there is quite large number of literature of great leaders, like personally commenting why this choreo buildings or books are important, especially, for example, concerning the philosophical stuff. Kim Jong-il was designed to be the one who commented on comparing Yulgok and Spinoza, and talking about really quite sophisticated intellectual questions. But on the other hand, it's important to know that this is like a tradition, it's Chijo Hashiyota, yeah, remarked, and it's not collected in his works. Yeah. Many, in the case of Kim Il-sung, like many comments on cultural protection and particular relics, like we can find in his works. By the way, these are online. Also the English edition, and it's really good. Like when you want to search something, just use it. So this is roughly the overview what happened in the first decades of the regime. And I would like to comment on discourse on Confucianism per se, yeah, because it took on the one hand, you know, like in the Marxist-Leninist theory and later Church's theory, yeah, the most important criteria is your class perspective. Yeah, you can really this ambiguity which we see in the treatment of the buildings and so on was present also on the intellectual level. Yeah, you can treat some things as a relics of the feudal past to be discarded, or at the same time you can treat them as the part of the intellectual tradition of glorious Korean nation. Yeah, and this is also to be seen dealing with Confucian thinkers and the history of Confucianism in Korea, where it took relatively long time until there were some systematic studies or like an official publication on Korean Confucianism, like the full-fledged like a book which was like published on the topic. It was just on Choraksa in 1960, in the second edition in 1961. And which is practically 15 years after beginning of the regime. But we have to say that those 15 years were it took so long. Why? Because first there was not so much people who could like really work on that. Yeah, to document the Confucian philosophy and history of Korean Confucianism, because even though there were like quite a lot of people well versed in those topics before the war, or like before the liberation, the most of people who were dealing with Confucianism escaped to the south. Yeah, and second point, there were quite a lot of scholars who really understood those things and went to north or stayed in the north, like was Iman Yu and who wrote Choson Kyoryuksa before the war, etc. But these people were, I would say, slightly suspicious. Yeah, the North Korean regime like preferred young scholars were all educated, like I would say, not exclusively, but predominantly in Marxist-Leninist theory, who were not compromised by education during the colonial period, and who were like able to concisely formulate what are the regime's requirements and crucial points. Though the people, with some exceptions, who were like writing the history of Korean philosophy, were relatively young. Yeah, they were under the guidance of the older professors like Hong Gi-moon and so on. But it was really centrally organized state activity by the Academy of Sciences and Kim Il-sung's university to produce like an official publication, which will state which things were good and which were not good. Of course, there were many studies before 1960. Already in the first journal Ryoksa Chemunje, we find a lot of stuff on the history of Korean Confucianism, and another journal which was later after Ryoksa Chemunje, Ryoksa Kwahak, has also like a lot of things. But it was only in 1960s when the North Korean regime started to create it really centrally organized, effective network of journals. Yeah, Ryoksa Kwahak was already existing, but the philosophical stuff and Confucianism as such were moved to Chorhakyonggu, yeah, which became the venue for the research on Confucianism in North Korea, and parallel there were a lot of stuff published in Kim Il-sung Chonghap Tehak Hakpo, the Journal of Kim Il-sung's University, where we found until nowadays quite a lot of stuff. Honestly speaking, if you would like to study the North Korean opinions on the Korean Confucianism, those basically foundations for everything were laid down in 1960s, with Chosun Choraksa, and all later publication where I would say slight modifications. And this we can see even about the most recent books like Chosun Chorak Chonsa, which is huge, and so on. And the basic framework is that there were some Confucian scholars which were progressive, for example, Hwadam and Yulgok, Kim Shi-sup, and there were some scholars who were reactionary, like Taege and other. There were some scholars, Shirhakpa, or Shirhak scholars were highly popularized. North Korea even published one English publication on Shirhak scholars, which is I will show you. Progressive Scholars at the Close of the Feudal Age in Korea. It's absolutely horrible translation, but it's nevertheless, you can see that in 55, there were some parts of the Confucian discourse which were favored by the regime. And those, I would say, directions are still valid. Sirhak are still favored, Hwadam is still favored. What really improved in the recent publication is that since 90s, like when it was, I would say, the great return of Korean nationalism, the scholars were previously labeled as clearly reactionary. You know, like when you read the descriptions of Taege, that Taege's feudal reactionary morality laid down foundation for Japanese occupation and American imperialist aggression and so on. Those were like a really quite harsh evaluations. But nowadays, even Taege, now the what happened like in the studies of Korean Confucianism philosophy in the last 2 decades is that it starts to be more positive. So even Taege is praised as a scholar who greatly influenced the Japanese Confucianism, etc. So after like 7 decades, when like a regime started to be sure that there are no more like relics of feudal thought, like the Confucianism started again to be somehow studied and appreciated as a part of Korean philosophy. It's a kind of paradox that while in the tangible culture heritage, you've got like a much more Buddhist stuff, and there is definitely more temples protected than Confucian shrines or relics. There are very few. It's completely opposite in intangible intellectual heritage, and what is taken as a traditionally Korean philosophy is basically for Chosun time is basically Confucianism. As a great scholars. And we have much more studies on Korean Confucianism than on Korean Buddhism. Actually, North Korean studies on Korean Buddhism are really rather rare and very few, unlike on like a Confucianism, where you got like a quite a lot of and sometimes very detailed studies. When I'm talking about the value of the studies from the early decades of the regime and current studies, I would say that it's really so that the basic stuff was formulated in 1950s and 60s. Yeah, and it's also you can see that, for example, because the North Korean scholars are really very careful not to overstep some boundaries and political problematic points. So what they are doing is basically they're recycling older studies and so on, and very rarely formulate something new. Yeah. So there's a huge intertextuality between like modern works on various subjects related to Confucianism and the older studies, and there is rather very few things which are really new. There are also problems because it's quite difficult to get access to materials. The scholars in the 50s, they were still working with original editions and so on, but nowadays, like, it's all closed in archives. So you can see really that the North Korean scholars are using only the secondary literature and are not working with the primary sources. Yeah, even the best of them at the Ilsung University or Academy of Sciences. Yeah. So if you, in other words, like if you want to learn something about Confucian statecraft or something like that, in North Korea, you will learn like the North Korean views on that, but not much the substance. It's usually rather problematic. Nevertheless, like it happens that you sometimes like find something new, but as I said, the intellectual productivity of the North Korean academia, the highest peak of that, it was until 1960 and so on, and then the like a Chuchkai ideology took the full control, and also like lot of scholars who were publishing in the early decades, and they were very good, were liquidated or purged and so on. Yeah. Only those who were able to be really mediocre survived. Yeah. We have it's slightly depressive, but in the Yoksakwahat, you can see really the debates between scholars, yeah, by the issues, and then some scholars disappear, never appear again. Yeah. And you know, from our retrospective view, we know that they did mistakes, that they, for example, opposed the idea that Chi should be equal with the matter in the Western sense, or were not able to say quickly enough that Kim Il-sung was a great materialist thinker and so on. And those mistakes in 1959 and so on could be deadly. It is, of course, like a connected with the fact that the academicians in those years were aligned to various political factions, and once the political faction followed, they were also purged and liquidated. There were like a huge problems in our critical institute etc. So until 1960, 1965, we find very few original ideas or articles. 80s and 90s were really depressive. If you read Chorakyongu from those years, there was everything only about Songun philosophy and Songun idea, with not so much historical research, etc. On the other hand, like we can say that the last 2 weeks are like really productive. Yeah. And there is quite a lot of studies and journals on Confucianism and such, and also Confucian culture relics. albeit only on those which survived, yeah, or were declared to be part of the canon. So, and I have to say that the North Koreans or the regime, they are well aware that those things are really important. The one of the marvel why we were able to get access to some documents and emails and so on was that we participated in evaluation of the UNESCO status for South Korean Confucian academies. Yeah. So in the case, like you can really persuade North Koreans that okay, like we can try to help you, like somehow popularize North Korean academies or materials which you have, and you can get the UNESCO status. That needs money, yeah, but you have to cooperate somehow. Then they are, in some cases, willing to cooperate. Yeah, of course, like you meet people who are like very hostile to idea of the cooperation with people from Europe. You find even people who are surprised that you are willing to cooperate with them because they are used to Chinese scholars who basically like take materials from North Korean and they present it as their own results. It happens as well. And the mood concerning like a research on those stuff is, I have to say, quite positive because they know that it brings money. Yeah, this is like probably you should ask better Elizabeth Shabanul, who is leading excavation in Kaesong and so on. But in last decade, it's really, I don't want to say it like that it sounds bad, but like if you have money, like basically most of the doors are for you open. Yeah. Just I'm a friend of transparency, so I can tell you that, for example, Ilsung Tank charged us, I don't know, it was, I think like a 15 euro per page, yeah, photo, which are like a huge, yeah, money. We are talking about thousands of euro, and when you are like able to pay that, like they are of course willing to cooperate. Or I would like to stress, even people in the charge, in the political position, are willing to cooperate. Yeah, I have to stress that on the level of rank and file academicians, yeah, they are in 99% always enthusiastic to work on something, because of course when you are coming, you are at least everybody is happy when somebody is interested what you are doing, and of course they are very eager to know what's going on in South Korea or in the world and so on. So this is like a just small footnote concerning sanctions, sanctions and attitude toward North Korea and so on. You know, I grew up with my professors and family members, like who spent like 40 years in communist regimes, and I talk specifically with many of them, like whether how to like understand this exchange with North Korea. Are we supporting regime or are we helping the people? Like we cannot, like when we are paying like thousands of euro for documents of in Minsktank, are we risking the cultural heritage, or like are we supporting financially the North Korean regime? And I have to say that I do not have a definite question on those things. on the one hand, I acknowledge that like every contact with North Korean regime is used by North Korean regime. On the other hand, every contact is also helping to, I would say, like normal people, or like promoting some kind of understanding, etc. But as I tell to my Berlin students, like who knows, maybe in 20 years, like the young students will ask us how you could travel to the country and sit in archives when you knew that there were thousands of people dying in labor camps and shooted for like and trying to escape and so on. And honestly, if I would see that some, I don't know, like a professor was visiting Berlin University in 1943, I would be also rather like skeptical what he was doing there, or he was really stupid, or just like professionally interested, or whether he was ignoring what was going on in Germany. So, those are quite difficult questions. Personal remark: I have to say that we've got like a quite interesting comparison with Cold War period, yeah, or for example, like a Russian or Soviet and American academic exchange and so on. And even at those times, like it was not so, I would say, strict. Yeah. And why I'm talking about that, yeah, this is like at the part of the eternal question, why there are so few people dealing with North Korea. Yeah, whether it's combination of factors, like that you do not believe that you can really learn, that you can get there. It's also kind of auto-censorship, like that we are paid by South Korean institutions and so on. And this is also a huge part of that. It's the collaboration with the regime or not. And you have like a bright variety of possible opinions of explanation. So I just hope that I will be not labeled as the North Korean henchman who was studying the archives while people were dying by hunger. This is by no means my intention. And I would say that what I really somehow see as the things which are giving me some kind of energy and optimism, because North Korea as such is a really depressive country. Fortunately, the regime is aware of that there is quite cheap alcohol and extremely cheap cigarettes. Yeah, so you can somehow survive, but during those weeks I'm there, I turned to regular alcoholic. Yeah. But I really concerning Confucian relics, I really see my like a job or like a mission, like to really document what happened with those things, where those things like can be find something about them. For example, these are probably the last photos of the Kija's altar. Kujudan in Pyongyang. They were taken by my old professor. And, you know, like it's still possible to meet people who were either destroying. I met people who were by the excavation of the Kisha grave. Yeah. And we were really able to this. I asked them what happened with tombstones and all those stuff. They were like, they were able to tell me that it was not such a clear whether Kija's grave should be destroyed or not, because after all, it was from Koryo times. There were some people who like knew that like okay, it's rather problematic, but it still should be kept. Though I will try my best to find in North Korea. This is also kind of paradox, because I say find in North Korea. Those things are they're not unknown, they're just not accessible. Yeah, the North Korean scholars and institutions, they know very well what happened with them. Yeah, though there is just information barrier. Yeah, I will tell you one example. Next to Kaesong, next to Kaesong, there is the village which was connected to 72 Korea loyalists, yeah, to Mundong. Yeah. And I have seen quite a lot of stuff on Tumundong Sobon, which used to be there. And something like 4 or 5 years ago, while we were in Kaesong, I asked them whether we could go to Tumundong as well. Yeah. And they told, the local guides told us that there is nothing in Tumundong. And I said, no, like there used to be the shrine and the academy and some stone inscriptions, etc. And there's nothing like that. Plus, the road is blocked by some natural disaster. Okay? And it's not possible. But the day after, I bought in Kaesong the small booklet where were pictures that there are still extant some stone stela standing in Tumundong. Yeah. So I went again to my guides and said, look, in your own publication, there are still standing some relics in Tumundong. And they said, oh yeah, really? So the next time, yeah. So by the next visit, we applied, could we visit Tumundong? Yeah, but it was not allowed. And then again, yeah. So you know, we know that there exists something, that there are some inscriptions, like maybe like we could ask them to make rubbings for us, and those inscriptions could be published and so on. But nevertheless, like it is not that we are the archaeologists who just something discovered. Yeah, we are rather diplomats who are allowed to see something what is well known to North Koreans, but they are not much willing to share it with the outsiders. And you know, there could be thousands of reasons why the North Korean authorities are supporting something or rejecting something. Yeah, they are not much happy seeing foreigners travel around, because once you are in the provinces, you see quite a lot of things which are, I would say, highly problematic. It's also kind of normal shame, because in many cases they know that in the moment you tell them, okay, this was really important and so on, and it's destroyed or damaged or not well kept. Yeah, they are of course not eager to show that they failed in protection of those things. Yeah, sometimes they're using like a very rather than to show you something what is not really 100% representative, what could be taken as a sign of the advanced North Korean culture protection, they rather cancel the whole thing. Yeah, they've got like many thousands of excuses. If you ask whether you can see in Pohyeonsan the copies of Palmante Jangyong, they will tell you that they are kept in the argon gas, and it's not accessible because they are filling the argon gas in the building. Yeah, and you see the building, which is like a holes, and it's by no means, it's complete nonsense that it's filled with argon gas. But nevertheless, this is their official excuse. So this is the one point which I would like to also stress, that what we are, or what I'm and my colleagues like doing on North Korea, is mostly descriptive stuff. Yeah, it's really like trying to find and bring things. And it's also probably the last reason why there's not so much people like engaged in those activities, because you are just the messenger. Yeah, you are not the great scholar who is doing the big series and so on. Plus, you know all the time that you will always have limits. Yeah, I've got, for example, the really pretty good archive on like Confucianism in North Korea and the Confucian philosophy. But nevertheless, I know that some questions I will never able to be and ask, like what kind of person was Chong Song Chol and why this book was written this like that, because they will just follow the official line. Yeah, and it's like quite difficult to get behind those things. I have to say that it's not that it wouldn't be possible to speak personally and honestly with North Korean colleagues, but there are some limits which they are not willing to risk. Yeah. So I see that I'm quite over the time. And I hope that this chaotic cascade of publications and pictures and personal observations will help you to start also dealing with the North Korean studies from, I would say, perspective of humanities, or in the case of Javier, of digital humanities. Yeah, those are things like sometimes like I can tell you, for example, that North Korean Okpyeon are now completely online, yeah, in smartphones. Yeah, there hasn't been the new edition, or I haven't seen from Hancha Sajon or Okpyeon in North Korea, because everybody is using the applications. Those are like fascinating topics, but unfortunately I'm a complete technical idiot. So I don't know how those things works and so on. And there is really going a lot of things. Yeah. There are a lot of books are published, even though like when you visit like this annual conference in the Kim Il-sung University, which is relatively possible, you see that there are like more and more people engaged in this stuff, and many of them are really enthusiasts. Yeah. Okay, like to be the academician in North Korea is certainly privileged, but translating of classic literature and doing research on Hanja and Hanmun in Korean and so on are not so prestige. Yeah. Nevertheless, I have to say that like the academicians are really like really privileged. Yeah, like the old professors of Kim Il-sung University are living in the new flats with flat screens, and they are equipped with phones and everything you can imagine. And so it's like a last, and especially under the sanctions, like Pyongyang is thriving and is thriving also many of those things. Yeah. If you look at the quality of the North Korean publications or the paper, it really improved, like in the print itself, the technologies. Yeah. And I think now it's quite interesting time, like to engage in those areas and get know what remains in North Korea, what are their opinions, etc. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm waiting for your questions. I have to say that what I know, I got like hundreds of photographs from 50s, yeah, which are documenting the life near Chongjin, when there was Czechoslovak hospital and so on, or like my professors who were traveling. And the Chesa were still quite normal or allowed, like at least until the end of 60s. Yeah. The end of 60s is also the time when it was restricted even from the foreigners from socialist countries to travel freely. Yeah. But I was in North Korea by Chuseok, and I have seen that there is like a tradition to go, like the family goes for the picnics. Yeah. to some spots. It was near Kaesong, yeah. So you could really see like a lot of families like going outside. But whether it was and it haven't seemed to me that they are going to former places of their family tombs. Yeah, it was rather like let's go outside because it's Chuseok and so on. And there were certainly no rights. I couldn't talk with those people, but when I tried to talk about those topics, like it was North Koreans were not much eager to talk about that. So like when you ask like the assistant from the university who is called Hong, like where is his Pongwan? He will tell, oh no, like this is not what we are doing now. We know just like a 3 generation and that's enough. Those were feudal superstitions. Yeah, and my ancestor who was, and you ask like, so you don't know who was your father? Or maybe Hong Kil Tong, yeah, joking. Yeah, and then this is like a really important question, because you know, like I myself grew up like in the society where we were 40 years trying to erase some historical memory and so on. It never really worked. Yeah. And it sounds totally absurd that the families, like, of course, like they know like their origins, yeah, but they are not much like talking about it, and it's like really a bit dangerous because for them the main identity is in this party hierarchy, yeah, and not your Pongwan. This is completely different set of values. But I can give you one example. I got one book from Rodongdang Chulpansa, which is called Mishine Hohuang Songwa Hedok Song, and it's like the party book against folk beliefs and superstitions, Saju Palja, Pungsu, everything. And so you are looking at that. And interestingly, they are doing, like they're arguing with very old parables from Yadam and so on, that Saju Palja is complete nonsense because the King Chongjo ordered to find somebody who has the same Saju Palja, and it was the blind, impotent guy or something like that, even though the Saju Palja were the same, and so on. And you are looking at that and you see, when the party publishing house has need in 2009 or 10 published the whole book, How to Fight Against Pungsu and Saju Palja and superstitions, that those has to be still there somehow, yeah. But it unfortunately doesn't work like that. You ask North Koreans, what do you think about Saju Palja? Of course, they will answer the horrible mission and everything so on. But I would say that from their grannies and so on, they heard something on the topic. Yeah. So certainly, I'm quite sure that nobody would dare to perform like a chesa as such. Yeah. But nevertheless, like some kind of family memory still has to be there. Yeah. Like 70 years are like quite a lot. When I'm talking to explaining to students, I'm talking about Kirishitan in Japan, who were like able to survive like a quite brutal persecution for 200-300 years. Yeah. On the other hand, like the North Korea is really like for me, I was really disappointed when I discovered that it doesn't work like that. For example, in the even in Stalinist Russia, it was possible to have an old icon from your grandmother at home, yeah, or something like that. But like not in North Korea. Yeah. I'm quite sure there's nobody who is keeping old books at home and so on, because it was really dangerous, and there is really quite a massive control. Even when you look like at the apartments and so on, you don't have no place or privacy where to hide those things. Yeah. So but there's like I believe that there has to be like some like a traditional level which is hidden, and it's just like a secretly transferred in the families once you are old enough not to disclose it. This is what I remember from my parents, that when always when they spoke about religion and so on, communist Czechoslovakia, they say, but by no means you shouldn't repeat it in school. Yeah, the children were always the most problematic. Yeah, also in the Soviet literature. For example, what I have heard from my old professors who were in Hamgyong, Hamgyong was really very conservative. Yeah. So in Hamgyong, even if the one my professor described a story that in Kilju, the local old guys tried to revive the Hyangyo and study classics again. And there, like children were begging them not to do that because they will bring problems for the whole city. So I'm quite sure that, for example, like in Hamgyong, like the local, what I have seen in pictures and what I like, what we know about like the tradition, it was pretty strong. Certainly not much in Pyongyang, which was industrialized, and certainly not much in really remote places like Kangye and so on, where like the most of the people were from despised classes, etc., and had other problems. Yeah. Probably Heju area would be belonging. And I have to say the one interesting thing, I was looking on Yongmanji, which is Upchi for Wiju area. Yeah. And I have seen there that in Wiju area, there were 7 Confucian academies, which had altogether more arable land property than Songyung one. Yeah. So it was like a really, I would say, quite regional. Yeah. Fishermen villages, probably not. Gyeongsong, like in Hamgyong, probably yes. Yeah.
I have a different question. When you said that, I think it makes total sense that you say, okay, every North Koreans know about these places, and everybody knows that they exist, but it's just as a visitor you don't have access. And then I thought about like the other way around, when you also talked about like Korean studies, or not Korean studies, but Confucian studies in North Korea. It might be totally unrealistic, but I had the idea that there is kind of elite academic group, perhaps, that has access to know. So because I thought, because everybody also in North Korea will know that there are studies going on Korean Confucianism, for example, outside of North Korea. I mean, and if there is a scholar, they will know that there is something. Do you think that they get access? And if they get, do you think that there is kind of a elite group of scholars who has access to non-North Korean publications? Do you think so?
It's really complicated. Yeah. On the one hand, North Korean scholars are somehow really well connected. Yeah. They are using like internet. They are traveling to Koryo and so on. But at the same time, I can give you one example. Yeah. As a North Korean, you are heavily restricted as such. It's not that like you frequently discover that you are like demanding or trying to do what they themselves are not allowed. Yeah. Even professor from Kim Il-sung University, when I was there in 2012, I was without Anewon and I was able to move freely. Yeah, it was somehow like the Kim Jong-un was new and so on. So I discovered that I know Pyongyang bookshops better than like a professor from Kimdae, because they were restricted to 1 or 2, and they would never be allowed to go to Potongmun Hotel, where is also bookshop, or to some other areas. Yeah, for them, like this is the one of the things you realize that for Anewon or colleagues, North Korean colleagues who are traveling with you, they are also for the first time. In many cases, they are completely happy that they can go to Sohyun so on, because they can smuggle stuff to Pyongyang. It's also like it's really complicated. But definitely North Korean regime has a couple of prominent scholars who are allowed to travel to China quite frequently. Yeah, to Koryo. The good example is Roha Hui. Sam Fermesh in his journal published the North Korean article of Tonghak, and I was writing the short introduction for that. Yeah, it was kind of like we try to organize it as a let's see how it really looks like what is done in North Korea. Yeah, and this is certainly, I would say, unusual. Yeah, that you can publish in the South Korean journal in English the North Korean article. Yeah, but as far as was our communication, there was no problem with that. We talked with Rohagwi in Pyongyang. We met him in Europe when he was going for Koryo. He agreed. They sent us via embassy in Berlin the text, and we were able to publish it. Yeah. So those things are certainly possible. There were prominent scholars, for example, I know that Kim Yong-hwan, who was famous linguist, and Chung Se-kugo scholar and so on, was long years in China, I think in Peita, yeah, and so on. There is obviously quite intensive exchange with China, but our Chinese colleagues are not much willing to share it. There is the strong connection is Yeonbyeon. Of course, like if you are like in Pyongyang at the conference, like at Kimdae, you automatically meet people from Yeonbyeon who are able to travel. But as I told you, like it is the regime is really, it's structurally complicated. Yeah, some people are allowed this, some people not. It's difficult when you are from Kimdae. You have not so much power as people from Kwahagwon. Yeah, or you know, like we discovered that people from Kimdae were never able to do what were allowed to do from Hevetongpo office, who are actually people in charge of the Koreans overseas. But they are like really extremely powerful. I was quite surprised, and they are able to communicate with various institutions and so on. Though we will see. Yeah, I can say that definitely. If you look at Koryo Hakhae, yeah, the North Korean has really by no means problem to send like 20 academicians to the world. Yeah, and they're talking there with South Korean scholars without much problems. Yeah, those meetings are, by the way, extremely funny because everybody is very cautious not to say something what could irritate the others. Yeah, so South Koreans are. And I'm wondering whether they are playing it or they mean it seriously, are like praising the North Korean scholarship and talking about what genius projects we could do once we are finally working together, and that's North Koreans quoting like the great leaders and so on. So
just more or less what I did with you, right?
But it happens, yeah.
And I was also, because when I introduced Vladimir, I forgot. Oh, I'm sorry. Diana first, please. Should I? I mean, it's short.
Go on. I can wait. I just hit by mistake. I can wait. There's no problem.
So I was just, because Vladimir is also, because I can see there are also some students from our classical Chinese, from our Hanmun study group here. So Vladimir is the one who is also now working on a textbook for classical Chinese. So this is the one. Vladimir is the one. And when you talked about primary sources and secondary sources, and you said that scholars are more using now, I mean, the secondary sources and don't have access to primary sources anymore, then I wonder, is it still worth learning Hanmun in North Korea? I mean, if you cannot really work with primary sources at all, is it possible?
No, this is really interesting because North Koreans are extensively learning Hancha. Yeah. Every educated North Korean has very good command of Hancha. And they've got like the people who are relegated, Kojon Hakwa and so on, they have a very good comment on Hanmun. What is rather problem is that they've got different way of translating. Yeah, it's not that they would use like a less Sino-Korean vocabulary, but there's really like a specific style of translation. But I was trying. Actually, I hope I can show it. I don't. I've got like some old materials on Hanmun in North Korea, yeah, and how they were studying it in 50s and 60s, yeah. But I met several times with people who are in charge of Hancha and Hanmun education, and I was trying to create a program with them to translate like a North Korean Hancha textbook for our students, yeah, which are quite interesting, and they've got also some more advanced publications. If you give me 1 second, talk about something, I will. Yes, I'm a genius. No, those are my first million. Wait, I will share the screen. This is my first North Korean million, but yeah, these are like a North Korean textbooks, and I have to say I was allowed only to take few pictures. They never allowed me to get it, yeah, because like they are forbidden to show textbooks to foreigners, even to sell. Yeah, there's the one thing, you can buy a lot of things but never textbooks. Yeah, it's extremely difficult. Like I once like bought a couple of textbooks by Brutal Violence that I was terrorizing Ajuma in the bookshop until the moment she gave up and sold it to me. Yeah, but they are very, very cautious what to show and so on. And textbooks were traditionally since 50 years are restricted. Yeah, but you see, it's pretty well done. The texts are, of course, ideologically let's have a see. Yeah, no 파지는 제육열풍. Yeah, so you've got like a perfect like a vocabulary and so on. It works like a, you know, like a you really see that you've got quotations of the great leaders. Yeah, but it's like it's real Hancha education as what we would expect in South Korea. Yeah, with a slightly different text and so on. And with Hanmun, like you've got. I have to say that I discovered that, for example, the one lady from the tourist guide was like a German speaking, had a very good comment of Hanmun too. Yeah, I was reading some Koreostella, and suddenly the guide lady started to read with me. And I was pretty impressed. Yeah, so it can happen that you end up as a German-speaking guide, tourist guide, but you have nevertheless quite solid Hanmun education. Yeah. And you know, like this is like for example, this is their line. It's published by Munhak Yesul Chulpansa, and it's Choson Kojon Munhak Sonji. It's the volume 95. Yeah. So they are like and even in the worst years, they were like really working on Isugwang and Hogyun and all that stuff, like a really quality classical. There is the Oyadam, Yumongin, Chakpumjim, and so on. Yeah. So this is like a really, they never gave up like even when the things from 90s are not much readable because the quality of paper is so difficult, you really cannot read it. It's like to print on brown toilet paper and used one. Yeah, like but nevertheless, like there was always like a lot of dedicated people who are like continuing in those things. They are most of them, they are disciples of Hong Yi-moon, yeah, and they are like quite proud, and they are doing like things pretty well. Sometimes they are censoring the old texts, yeah, and manipulating and so on. But once, like technically speaking, they are very good.
Diana, I think now it's your turn. Before I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I don't want to change the topic because it was quite interesting. But I was just wondering about the last 2 decades. You were saying, Vladimir, that there's this tendency to reevaluate the Joseon scholars and to see them in a different light. And I'm this is happening because I mean, I understand why they would do it in the 70s to help promoting, not promote, to help make Juche more, to make it more palatable in a way. So they would, you know, use parts from the Joseon scholars' ideas, Joseon scholars that previously they would have blamed as being backwards and feudal and so on. But now Juche is quite well established, so I wonder why you think they are, you know, recycling this again in the last 2 decades.
I wouldn't say that that they are recycling that. I would rather say that they are like putting the old stuff and implementing it to the new framework. Yeah. And this framework like really begins, I would like to say, like when really you would like a cutting definition with Tangun discovery. Yeah, this is like a really something. I know articles from 50s when like they are laughing that some people believe there was Tangun and so on. Yeah, that it's contradicting to all historical knowledge and so on. And you can see like how like the big shift was from international Marxism to like a, let's say, nationalist Juche. And you know, they are not denying the previous interpretations. Yeah, they are like basically, they are not saying that okay, Ulgok is always good. Yeah, but Tege is still bad, but not so bad as before, because he was Korean after all. Yeah, this is like a kind of there was many reactionary elements, and he influenced Japanese, but unlike before, it was the sign like in 50s, this was like the influence Japanese equaled late foundations of Japanese imperialism. Now it equals spread the glory of Korean culture in Japan. Yeah, so the same thing is interpreted in rather different way. And what they are like doing, it's somehow repeating what they were doing in 50s, was to put like everything into Marxist-Leninist framework. What is reactionary, what is cultural heritage, what is, and so on. And now they've got different framework, and it's like I would say like a Korean Juche chauvinism. And they are slowly putting those things together. It's important to know that we are talking about few people. Yeah, we are talking about limited resources. Yeah, we are talking about a couple of scholars who are working on classical literature and so on, about tens of people. And maximum, if you look what is published in North Korea annually, we are talking about a few hundred books. Yeah, we are like and they like they don't have much means how to rewrite in the positive style. I would say Juche, like a Korean nationalism style, the whole history. It takes time. Yeah, they're like doing it like slowly. They spent like of course like 50 times more energy on Kim Il Sung's or Kim Jong Il's works memorization and so on. But nevertheless, they still have to comment like how Chung Hyun-jun is working and so on. Yeah, there are still the same other problematic points. It's very difficult because you have old comments even by Kim Jong-il who are critical of Chung Hyun-jun, for example. Yeah, there were always problems with the erotic scenes, etc., etc. And now you have to somehow, you cannot deny previous quotations from Kim Il-sung, but you have to put it into another framework. And since those humanities and history, they're okay, like on the first side, it's like a really prestige. Yeah, it's still on the university, they've got still their journals and so on. But on the other hand, like the North Korea has really very limited resources, like to do that. Yeah, they are able to engage in some propaganda reconstruction of Buddhist monastery and so on, but you know, like there are other priorities. Yeah, so there are like what are doing the scholars like is basically putting again the things to some coherent order where you can assure yourself as a North Korean that everything is great because you are North Korean, you've got such a glorious culture.
Andrew?
Hi there. Yeah, just a very quick question because I've got to go in a second. When you've been there, have they ever mentioned Nangnangun, the Lelang commandery? And have they ever mentioned, even if they deny the commandery, have they ever mentioned the discoveries from the early 1990s, the Hokubu, the census tablets that they found, or strips, bamboo strips? And at that time, they also found apparently some of the strips had the Analects on them. Did they ever mention?
Yeah, I was in 2012. I was arrested when I tried to try to go to Nang Nang, and it's one of my favorite stories with Miriam Levensteinova. And I have to tell you that we got relatively deep into the enemy's territory because nobody was able to comprehend that there are two white persons, one with red hairs, a second one with full beard, who are just walking there. Yeah, they were somehow ignoring us because they haven't believed that we are real. Yeah, but they do not have much problems with Lelang excavation and so on. But they just say that those are all Korean things. Yeah, this is you know, in this case, if you read Rohaki's book in Sojourn of Korea, his article, yeah, he says like he takes the symbolics from Anak and so on, and he says this is by no means Taoist, but it's like a purely Korean, and Koreans invented yin and yang and everything, and that's okay. Yeah, you know, we are talking with people who are officially spreading belief in Sinji, yeah, Habiru script, and all those stuff. Yeah, those are like you know, I have seen Angun once, yeah, and he's now currently not on display. Maybe it will change, but nevertheless, like you got like things really possible to. I think like they do not bother to suppress something. Yeah, they are like, but because they are eagerly like using in their own context. Yeah, discovery of the Analects, like they can just like for them it's you know, like the proof that the local population was highly educated. Yeah, they by no means are thinking in direction that there were some Chinese influences. Yeah, so this constructing of this pseudo history is you know, even your wildest like a South Korean examples are quite like sane compared to some North Korean current, I have to say, current theories. Yeah, is like if you are reading the stuff from Toho and or like archaeologists like in 50s, they were like quite sound and normal people. Yeah, now it's really extremely bizarre sometimes. And you know, like when they are teasing you because they love to ask you, have you learned Sinji? And you cannot tell them no, because it's nonsense. Yeah, so you are, and they are really enjoying how you are trying to be diplomatic. And I'm quite sure that most of them, they know that it's completely absurd. Yeah, and they are like really trying. It has to make them a lot of fun. Yeah. Asking foreigners about those things, and they know that you cannot say no by no means, and so on. So I would say like they still heavily invest and are interested in archaeological excavations, even though probably less than before. In 50s it was really the huge endeavor. They are still like a continuing excavation in Kaesong and so on, but they've got them like a mindset, like Koreans invited all the imaginary, those are all Korean stuff. So like once like you have this framework that everything in Lelang is Korean, then you have no problem with excavation. Yeah. Poi and Shuchi, I have to say that I was doing for AXA the North Korean debate on Kija, yeah, and I think they were like I mentioned like once or twice, and concerning Cheongsongmyo, also the shrine in Soyangsan, I've got description from the, I think 57, 50, 58. 58 from one my professor in his diaries. Yeah, like I don't know, it's half a page, like describing, and I don't know. I know I was there were like inscriptions there, and I have seen them somewhere, but like. I can have a look what I will find on that. And what was the second question? With
Tumundong, do you expect anything to find there? I mean, you said that
I have seen
there's steel, right? Yeah.
I have seen that there was some specific gate, like the 3 doors, yeah, which I have seen also on the old photos and the new one from 2015, 16. And there maybe, and I have seen on the pictures that there were some inscriptions, yeah, but probably not, probably not the buildings, yeah, but as I said, like the old version of Tumundong Sowonji is in archive. We will get it, and I hope they will like allow me, because you know it's like it's really close to Kaesong. Yeah, we are passing like 3 kilometers, like yeah. And I was really trying to tell them, they said the road is blocked, and I said I will go by walk. It's not possible to go by walk. And so on. So they've hard to say, like I have to say that you know it's really difficult. Yeah, for example, in Hamgyeongdo, yeah, there was a lot of things. Some of them are extant, some of them not. and even the museums and so on. You know, there are whole like parts of Korean history. For example, Jurgen stuff, which are only in Hamgyongdo. Yeah, like this is my my next, after I will finish all my studies on Korean Confucianism, I will start with Jurgen, and I will make a campaign, Jurgen Lives Matter, and I will document the genocide against Jurgen. But for example, there were like local names are of course Jurgen and so on, but there was still like a distinguishing between the originally Jurgen villages and Korean villages. Yeah, there was like a still like in 50s like anti-Jurgen racism. It was among the local population said that those people are Jurgen and they are lazy and they look like this and that. And there are like inscriptions, yeah, and a lot of fascinating stuff. Yeah. So this is also one of the problems why we are not somehow moving with this really interesting question of the Georgian Korean interactions and so on, because it's basically relegated to North Korean territory. But there was like I got catalog of the local Hamgyong museum where there was like a Georgian pottery and a lot of things which like are not in South. Yeah.
Sure. Is there any? So we are. Some more people are leaving. Oh, Isabel.
Yeah, hello. I have many questions, but maybe just one remark rather than a question. At some point you said, yeah, there are not enough people studying North Korea, and in the end we wouldn't be able to produce a high, academic production. You can only describe, but I think that what you presented today and all the stories you have, it's really in this current trend of self-reflexive historical research. I mean, because you're using the oral testimonies of your professors, his pictures, the book he bought in the 60s and everything, and then you're comparing and using what you yourself have gathered. So in the end, I think that it would be a wonderful book. I mean, even though it's not systematic or, like a big study, I mean, a very coherent study, it could be really, really interesting. And even in the methodological sense, what can we do with all those data and all those memories and stories and even your personal reaction to all this? I mean, so because North Korea is not exactly the usual field work, but it's also becoming known. So anyway, because I'm sure you know Valérie's book, Benjamin Joanneau and Valérie's book about fieldwork in Korea, in North Korea. So I was just thinking about this, and you should do that for North Korean scholarship, even though it's not systematic. I'm sure it will be really, really helpful for Korean studies in general. Because as you said, there's so many topics that we cannot cover, or even we cannot dream of, because it's in North Korean territory or in other rhetoric, other traditions, and in academic interaction as well with China, Soviet Union and everything. So yeah, I'm very, I'm expecting your new masterpiece.
Thank you, Isabel. But you know, there is the one problem with North Korea, and that there is really like on the one hand interesting, on the other hand like quite depressive. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then when you are like when you are sitting whole day with people who are like telling there's nothing what in archive. This was destroyed by American imperialists and so on. You are watching starving people in the countryside. You are watching the feasting elites in Pyongyang, like they are driving the newest Mercedes cars and so on. And then you are asking what I'm doing here. I can write my Confucian philosophy in 16th century in Berlin, and I do not have this stress. Yeah, this is when you see I'm quite okay. Yeah, because first of all I'm slightly older, and second point is that I've got quite a historical memory that my generation of my grandparents were in concentration camps and fighting in wars and so on. So when I hear about some executions and tortures and so on, I'm coming from the region where it was quite common. And even when you are traveling in Yugoslavia, it's such a things prepare you for something like that. But when you see how your younger colleagues are suffering, they really do not understand what is going on, why those people are as they are. Your question, do they really believe or that or no, or these are these are things we are now theoretical debate whether Germans believed in Nazism or how much and so on, whether they knew about the Holocaust or not. It sounds quite academic, yeah. But in North Korea, I'm basically asking the quite similar questions with the real content, yeah. And it's something and then you suddenly see, look, you've got beautiful wife, you've got 3 kids, you've got you've got flat, you can go fishing with friends. Do you really need North Korea for that? And it always takes me 1 year and said, yes, North Korea, of course, again, yeah. But I would say that's also really, I'm a quite it keeps me sane, because I'm switching between my old classical stuff, what I'm doing regularly, what I studied at Songyunwan with my beloved professor. This is one of the things that I'm the only foreigner, yeah, who really professed to, foreigners are trying to be polite to North Koreans, but it doesn't work, yeah. They've got their opinion already formed, you are on the other side, you are the enemy, yeah. And a lot of people are trying to say, in North Korea it's not so bad, in South Korea there are many problematic points. I told them honestly that I love South Korea, it's my second home. I'm a proud a disciple of reactionary Confucian scholars from Songyunwan, yeah. And they respected it, because this is now it was clear. I was not some naive peace activist. Yeah, I was I was honest enemy, and we were quite okay. Yeah. But once you try to talk about Chuchka and so on, then you are a real idiot. I think another problem is what is really a problem in North Korean studies. I would say South Korean attitudes. Yeah, this is something that you, and this is something what is never discussed, that the general South Korean attitudes on various levels, yeah, are I would say quite sympathetic to North Korea, yeah. If you would ask the students in Seoul whether Japan is bigger enemy or South Korea or China, they will say Japan and then probably United States, yeah, and so on. And what I think is really the most difficult thing to explain somebody. Kunde Keuster talked about that at the AXE conference. Yeah, and he was noting that North Korean artists love to paint. Yeah, and they are really very good in that, and that's their life. They are real artists. Yeah, they are not hired servants or propaganda. They are really living. They are, and I would say yes, I agree. Like North Koreans are like humans, yeah, like everybody, everybody else. But and of course they are like proud to be the good painters. Like they guaranteed their lives and so on. Do they really believe those things or not? Yeah. To some degree, you have to survive. Yeah. You know, they know very well that they are living in North Korea, and outside it's completely different and so on, but what they can do. And but this is very difficult to mediate to people who have like a really no experience with any like a real life threatening restrictions or something like that. You know, like when started the war in Yugoslavia and people started to massacre each other, I have many friends among Yugoslavians, and like you know, the difficult mindset. You are living in one city, suddenly everybody is are enemies. But this is for like people so far away that they really cannot imagine that you are living in constant life. Yeah, and that it's like your job. Yeah, it's very few people are saying that we as academicians are regularly also lying. We are promising to students that once they will graduate our university, they will be very successful. It's not really, of course, complete nonsense and so on. But I would say talking about those things is somehow like connected with the very question of North Korea. If you look, for example, Tatiana Gabrusenko, the book on North Korean writers, which I found very good, yeah, she is quoting like South Korean critics who honestly believe that the North Korean literature is absolutely perfect and good and okay. They can argue that under Park Chung-hee they ever published this, the same things and so on. And though at the end, you know, like you got like a South Korean pseudo history, like the NGO is writing on, and when you say, okay, there's something different to do the pseudo history in South Korea, and something different is official stance in like North Korea. It's for many people it doesn't make like make much difference. Yeah, and I have to say that what is for me, for example, really surprising is seeing like and it's common tendency to see North Korea and the dictatorship in South Korea as basically one-to-one. Yeah. And this is, I would say, like a rather prevailing opinion. And I don't want to flatter Park Chung-hee, yeah, but it's like a really different when we talk about 2,000 or 20,000 and 2 million. Yeah, it's also difference in form and so on. But you know, this is something what should be done and discussed decades also earlier. Yeah, and now like we are trying to make our like a North Korean science fiction or something like that, and we are coming to this huge quagmire of conflicting opinions and somehow survive it without being too unpolite. Okay, thank you once more, Daphne.
Yeah, I think we should slowly come to an end. It's getting dark here. But if there are any other questions, I mean, Vladimir, he cannot really run away now, right? So we have him.
I'm in the middle of forest. I have nowhere to.
Yeah. So thank you very much. That was really, really nice. So it felt so nice because I was so sad this December. I had so many plans to meet people like Vladimir and everybody like Isabel, everybody who came here. But at least, I mean, we met once in La Rochelle, right? So that was nice. Yeah, thank you so much for joining. Yeah, and hope to see you soon in person. Of course, next year everything will be fine.
Yes, this is what we have heard already.
I feel so bad. Thank you so much, Vladimir.
Okay, Barbara, thank you all. Have a nice
Yeah.
time. Take care.
Bye. Bye.